Greetings, my name is Denise Moore and I am a student in the Masters of Social Science program at Troy University. I'm going to present my research proposal entitled Is Black on Black Crime More Stigmatized Than Other Interracial Crimes and Why? Over the past 30 or 40 years, the media and prominent figures alike have reported on the black on black crime trend. This catchphrase is used to designate a specific type of violence and victimization threat. Black on black crime describes the intersectionality of violence in a certain demographic, namely, black people. As noted by Headley, when typecasting black people as more prone to delinquency and violence, it is another form of victim blaming, purporting that for some reason people are more likely to be victimized due to some innate characteristic or character flaw. Statistically speaking, almost all crimes are actually intraracial in nature, meaning that blacks offend against blacks, whites offend against whites, Hispanics offend against Hispanics, and so on. According to Hudson, black killers murder around 90% of black homicide victims, and white victims are slain at approximately the same rate by white killers. The purpose of this study will be to delve into how news coverage affects attitudes and prejudices towards minority communities as opposed to their white counterparts. I will utilize a mixed methods data collection model. I will review news reports found in television broadcasts and also newspapers. Additionally, I will perform a quantitative collection of surveys, which will give a snapshot of how the general American public feels about pertinent issues. In a country where racist policing, selective media coverage, and structural inequalities abound, black people are generally seen as the most criminal segment of American society. But the problem with that is that it assumes black people are inherently criminal, and the statistics just don't belie that. According to the FBI Census Bureau, in 2013, blacks committed 5,375 murders. In comparison, whites committed 4,396 murders. This is startling because whites comprise 63% of the populations, while blacks only make up 13%. And that makes it easy to see why it's easy to jump to the conclusion that blacks might inherently be more violent or more criminal. However, less often talked about is the amount of white people that are killed by white people. It's actually a similar figure. The State of Working America reports that among racial and ethnic groups, African Americans have the highest poverty rate at 27.4%, while whites are only at 9.9% poverty. So violence is most likely predicted by poverty, not by race. Not only do negative depictions leave racial majority with an adverse mental image of minorities, it also has an undesirable effect on minorities as well. Internalization of the negativity may actually lead to reenactment. So seeing someone on TV that did something, killed someone, can actually make it more plausible or readily accessible for someone to go out and do that themselves. Hurley et al. Showed that overexposure to these new negative images in the news, meaning repetitive exposure to crime, showing that race is the reason why these people are being criminal, it promotes the belief about the barbarity of blacks. Harris notes that this racial bias may sometimes be unconscious. It affects police decision-making on encounters with minorities, producing effects that resemble that of well-formed prejudice. These racist beliefs lead to over-policing of minority neighborhoods, thus increasing the arrest rates. And this promotes the idea that blacks are more violent or more criminal. It's an endless cycle. Black Lives Matters movement is constantly under scrutiny for being racist when they are simply fighting for equal opportunities in housing and employment, as well as fair policing. Tober notes that on its surface, residential segregation of blacks from whites, with blacks residing in larger concentrations in inner cities and whites living primarily in the suburbs, is due to the obvious economic disparity. Simply put, blacks being generally poorer than whites and killing those closest to them, which happen to be other poor black people. Redlining and other discriminatory housing practices in lending and renting keep the races separated and far from equal. Peterson et al. Offered the explanation that these communities then fall into disrepair and leave their impoverished residents with less opportunities for advancement due to the destabilization of local institutions and community services that provide informal controls to prevent crime. Atkins reports blacks are 7 times more likely than whites to be offenders and 6 times more likely to be victimized. In fact, most criminal offenses, especially those considered to be more urban in nature, where poverty tends to be the most pronounced, occur within 5 or 6 city blocks of where the offender resides. One can conclude that black-on-black crime is no more prevalent than any other intraracial crime. It's simply more remarked upon due to racial biases in the news. The main question that I will address is as follows. Is black-on-black crime perceived as more prevalent than other interracial crime? And what is the cause of this bias? There is a stigma attached to black-on-black crime, yet there is no separate category for white-on-white crime, Latino-on-Latino crime, etc. The rates at which homicides occur are not disparate, according to the FBI. I propose a mixed methods designed to answer the main research question. Data will be collected through both interviews and news analysis. I will be mailing surveys to neighborhoods that closely resemble the demographic makeup of the American population. These surveys will collect information about the participants' attitudes regarding crime and victimization as it relates to race. I will also conduct a media qualitative study to scrutinize the news stories of the 2 most prominent television news outlets, Fox and CNN News. In this aspect of my research, I will need to code the news segments that contain violence and crime as they relate to racial identities. In addition to the television news outlets, I will also be reviewing the 2 most read newspapers, namely the New York Times and the Washington Post. I will acquire the 10 most recent issues of each publication and code each article that contains crime and violence. With all 4 sources, I will make sure to note which crimes are being reported most heavily and how that compares to the national averages of interracial and intraracial crime statistics. Okay, delimitations and limitations. This research is able to address the issues inherent in news reporting and the extent to which news outlets are race baiting or otherwise perpetuating racial stereotypes in their journalism. It's quite easy to research if there is actually a higher incidence of black-on-black crime versus other interracial crime. I seek to understand why this myth exists, why black-on-black crime is considered an issue in society versus any other types of crime. Discovery of the origins of this phenomenon is the first step to dampening the effects. There is an entire cesspool of racism that exists both in media and in the everyday experiences of people of color. This research will be able to assess the origin of this racist stream of consciousness. Limitations for the study. Due to funding and time constraints, it would be nearly impossible to get a sampling of the entire American population that accurately reflects that group. This country has millions of people from many different backgrounds and ideologies. It would be exceedingly hard to represent every faction of life and those philosophies. There's no adequate way to gain the correct representative sample, so a convenient sample would need to be used. Significance of the study is that in the aftermath of this 2016 election, and even prior to that, there have been an incredible amount of reports of hate criming including property damage and violence from both blacks and from whites. But there has been a intense uptick since the election. Under similar conditions of racial upheaval in the UK most recently, the Home Office recorded a 41% jump in racial and religious abuse in the month following that referendum back in June. I would expect that when the FBI comes out with their annual hate crime statistics late 2017, it would also show the same kind of increase. So this study seeks to find out the reasons for the increase in violence and racial prejudices. And hopefully, if we know why this is occurring, we can then control it and decrease it. So thank you for watching this, and have a good evening.